Marie Antoinette, in the French Revolution, said the now famous quote to her executioners, "Give me cake or give me death." Jesus is saying to his two bold disciples, you're asking for cake, and I can't even give you that cake, but I am offering you the second option, to share in my death. Meanwhile, the other 10 disciples were eager to have the two of them share in that death quickly. Now, none of us like to suffer. None of us are all that eager to share in the death of Christ, to drink the cup that he will drink, as he puts it. That's neither fun nor usually desirable. Given the choice, we will always choose cake. Wouldn't we rather approach Jesus with our big, audacious dreams? Jesus, can you fill my bank account with $1 billion? How about dropping a penthouse suite from the sky and make it untaxable? And Jesus, I'd really like to fly around like Superman. And if you're too busy for any of those things, can you at least let my hockey team win the Stanley Cup this year? Especially if you're a Toronto Maple Leaf fan. You know, it's easy enough to cook up our own private plans for paradise, with us as the king or the queen eating cake for the rest of our lives. There's something very human about that, and something also very human about resisting the opposite of that, which again is any type of human suffering. And in the end, we're all just longing for heaven. We're just not all that patient. We want heaven now, and we think we know what it could look like. And the good news is that Jesus knows and understands both of these desires. He understands the desire for heaven right here, right now, as we would see it. And he understands our aversion to pain and suffering. From the letter to the Hebrews today, it says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin." It means that Jesus was tempted. Jesus was tempted to build his kingdom here on earth. We're all familiar with the story of Satan tempting him in the desert. But of course, he turned down all these things, all these temptations, to do his Father's will instead. He had a mission. He'd been sent to set us free, and nothing was going to get in the way of that mission, not even when that would lead him through pain, suffering, and death. And so when his disciples start talking about places of honor and thrones and glory, it was time for a bit of a reality check for them. And Jesus says, "Look, guys, I invited you to take part in my mission. That's what you get when you sign on with me. Remember what I said. Those who would be my disciples must pick up their cross and follow after me." Is that still what you want? Is that still what you want? We find Jesus asking us the same question when the cross comes our way, whether that's in the form of an illness or the death of a loved one, or even in the form of diocesan restructuring. You see, in all of those realities, we didn't get to choose. Someone said recently that change can be hard enough when I choose it for myself, but at least I only have myself to blame. And they said, when others choose it for me, it's more difficult, but I have two strategies. I take the blame game off the shelf, where it's nestled between Scrabble and Monopoly, and I tell the complaint train to leave the station. Now that's tempting, isn't it? At least for me. You see, the tricky thing about the cup of suffering that Jesus asks us to drink is that we have to make a choice to not make it about us. And we have to be intentional about that, because pain is inherently selfish. Have you ever got your hand caught in a car door? I have. You can't think about anything except your hand. And that's why it's so easy to focus on ourselves and where it hurts when someone else is the cause of our suffering. And we might be entirely justified in that, but at some point, we have to move forward and try to see the positive side of things or make something positive out of it, as hard as that is. You may have seen the lineups outside the NSLC the day that cannabis was legalized. I heard that the amount sold in Nova Scotia and the money taken in made national headlines. I'm pretty sure most of the sales were for recreational use. And as I drove by, I looked at those people lined out the door, and I thought, there's 75 people, and it was that many, looking for Jesus. There's a reason to embrace the cup of suffering. There's why we need to get back to mission as a church, because nothing else is going to satisfy. Only God is the answer to the longings of the human heart. And the church is uniquely placed to bring that answer to the people who need it and are looking everywhere but here. It's no secret that there are whole generations of people who aren't going to church anymore, who never did. In fact, the youngest generations now are growing up knowing next to nothing about faith quite often. They don't know who Jesus is or why he's important. They simply don't have a clue. It's very sad. You know, I was doing a funeral mass here at St. John Vianney about a year ago, and during the consecration, as I elevated the host, one young person walked over, toting a coffee, and stood almost in front of the altar and just looked at me, completely puzzled. I suppose, absent any context whatsoever, what we do here is kind of weird, and that his reaction is perfectly sensible, even if it was disrespectful. We exist as a church to reach people like them. And the painful reality is that we haven't done a good job of that recently. And when I say that, you might be having a reaction inside of you, because maybe you've thought, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, and it's very sad, maybe you've thought that God is angry with you because your children aren't going to church, and you blame yourself for that. And that's painful, and that's a wound. But to hold yourself responsible for that isn't right. You did for your children what your parents did for you. How could you expect that it wouldn't work the same way? Or you might think I'm blaming you for the situation. I'm not. Here's the facts. The world changes very rapidly, and perhaps no faster than in our own present time. And the church hasn't kept up with the culture. You know, there's two popular responses to that whole thing. The first is to cut ourselves off from the culture entirely and just label it evil. But Jesus came to redeem the world, not to sit on the sidelines and condemn it. The other great temptation is just to imitate the world, to be just like it. But when we do that, we have nothing to offer the world that it doesn't already have. The third option is a lot of work. It's not easy. It's why we don't do it quite as often. It's to keep up with the culture so that we can understand it, not necessarily adopt it, but understand it, so that we can speak the timeless truths of the gospel into it in a language that people can hear and understand. And that really is a cup of suffering, because just when we're getting effective at reaching the world, it changes on us again and again and again. It's very flexible, which means we have to be flexible too with our methods and with our structures. At the Assembly of the People of God next weekend, the Archbishop will be talking about the plan for new parishes stronger together. He and his team have been looking at our parish structures and asking the question, do they exist in such a way right now in 2018 that they help accomplish our mission in the best possible way? Are they reaching the world for Jesus? Are they reaching the diocese for Jesus? And the answer they came up with was no, not as much as they could be. They were, but the world went and changed on us. So sure, resources have been depleting, and restructuring our parishes can solve that issue somewhat, but that is not the end goal. which is why much of the focus is actually going to be around growing together as disciples through formation opportunities, leadership training and development, team-based ministry in our parishes, getting back to our spiritual roots. Now, of course, you're wondering how that might affect us. What cup do we have to drink, and how strong is the liquid in the cup? The proposal from the Archdiocese envisions that Holy Trinity Pastoral Unit becomes one canonical parish, incorporating our three current parishes of St. John Vianney, St. Elizabeth Seton, and St. Francis of Assisi, along with St. John the Evangelist in Windsor. Now, this is a proposal. It's not written in stone or in the stars, but on paper, and is subject to change. We're at various stages of discussion with the Archdiocese, with the Companions of the Cross, and with others. And so there remains at this stage the possibility that St. John the Evangelist is not added to our unit. However, this proposal will be announced at the Assembly of the People of God next week. I'm sure you're asking, and have been asking for some time, how is this going to impact my parish church? Are we going to be open? Are the Mass times going to change again? And other questions like those. Those are fair questions. So here's what I know and here's what I don't know. I do know that this will be a difficult time of change and transition, and of course there's going to be fear and uncertainty in a time like this, and that is difficult. I also know that there are going to be opportunities as well as challenges, new models of leadership, increased collaboration and team ministry, and a greater focus on our mission as a church to bring Jesus to the people who are looking for him and may not even know it yet. I also know that unlike some of the parishes and regions in the Archdiocese, we at Holy Trinity are in the beginning stages of this restructuring process. Others have been actively moving towards mergers for quite a while. What I don't know yet is the answer to your questions about Mass times and church buildings and things like that. Until we know what the final composition of churches is going to be, we're not going to start having those conversations because it's a lot of speculation without knowing our starting point. So really, we're still on the front end of all of this. So I know this is difficult. This is a cup of suffering. But our faith is centered on the Paschal mystery, the death and rising of Jesus. And we share in that mystery in a very real way as Christians, as we heard in the gospel. And my prayer is that this process does lead to what the diocese envisions, not just moving furniture around, but a vibrant, full, and missionary church here in Halifax, Yarmouth, with Holy Trinity playing a key role in the renewal.